This is Big Podcast.
Have you used Alibaba or AliExpress? Do not buy microphones on that site, by the way. But there are some things that it's interesting to see that if you look them up and then go to Amazon, you'll see the same thing for a much higher price. You're going direct to the companies that make these products, or at least have a better deal on them because they're in China. Anyway, we're going to talk about that, cutting out the middleman in your podcast. It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. If you want to grow your podcast, attract more people to your podcast, make a podcast that people care about, make a podcast that people share with other people, you are in the right place. My name is David Hooper. BigPodcast.com is the website. This is the audio edition of my weekly newsletter that is called Big Podcast Insider. You can find it at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. I send it out via email every Friday morning, New York City time. If you want the links to the things that I'm talking about, more information about the things that I talk about, newsletter.bigpodcast.com is where to get it. Don't write it down. I'm going to remind you after every single article that I cover. And here's what's in this issue. Cut out the middleman. You are not late. Yeah, you. I'm talking to you. The 30-day solo podcast challenge. Rapport building with Howard Stern. Pod Indie. It's coming up in Indianapolis. The world is a quiet place. Also some classified ads, things will help you grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, make a podcast worth talking about and that people are talking about. The things that this podcast is about. This episode of Build a Big Podcast is brought to you by Riverside.fm. Studio quality recordings anywhere. Doesn't matter if you're in Nashville like I am. You got to connect to somebody in Chicago, somebody in Tokyo, and somebody in London. Riverside can handle it. And one of the coolest things about Riverside is when you have these different people on the line, it's getting everybody on an individual track. There is no bleed between the tracks. And I love remote recording for this reason alone. That is the best part about it. Well, the fact that you don't have to leave your house. Also nice. But when I'm in the studio with somebody, I'm talking, I'm coming through the guest mic. The guest is talking, the guest is coming through my mic. It's not that big a deal. We can work around it, but there is some bleed. If you want clear, crisp recordings, no matter where you are in the world, you're going to sound like you're in the same room, maybe even better than the same room. Plus some great features like text-based editing, AI-powered silence remover and filler word removal. Also magic clips, AI-powered highlights. Riverside goes through your podcast. It finds what's interesting, chops it up automatically, gives you highlight clips for social media so you can grow your podcast that way. It's a system. You record your podcast, you can edit your podcast, you can market your podcast. I want you to try it for free. Here's how to do it. Go to riverside.fm. They're going to give you a couple of hours. This is an opportunity for you to look under the hood, kick the tires, play around with all these features that I'm talking about. Get an interview. Get 2 interviews. See how it works for you. If you like it, I've got a discount code. That discount code, Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. That's riverside.fm. Go there right now. Get your 2 free hours. Check it out. See how you like it. And if you want to stick around, here's a discount code to get 15% off. Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. Here we go. Thanks for joining me. We got a great episode ahead. And like I said, I'm going from thing to thing to thing, all of them about podcasting. And to make it easier on you, you're going to hear this sound. That's how you know I'm going to the next thing. And that's how you know if you want more information, you want links to what I'm talking about, you can go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 203. Ready? Cut out the middleman. Talked about Alibaba. Real quick. Do not buy microphones on Alibaba. I know it is tempting. I know they look similar to a microphone you might get on Amazon or another authorized dealer, but looks are deceiving. You do not want a microphone to fail on you. Still, cutting out the middleman, it's tempting. Let's talk about how that relates to your podcast. Zita Christian, you've heard me mention her before. She started her podcast, when she was 69 years old. Today, she's well into her 70s. She's still going strong. I've got her linked, newsletter.bigpodcast.com if you want to listen to what she does. She's got a lot of stories about what it took for her to get going. Imagine that, 69 years old. Computers, you're probably not as familiar with them as somebody who's 20 or 30, or even like me in your 50s. A lot of us, we take this stuff for granted. I had a computer in my house when I was 10 years old. Commodore 64. A lot of Gen Xers, you're going to remember that. 64K was a big deal. Before that, we had a VIC-20. 5K. Not super powerful machines. These kids today, you don't know what you've got. A lot of power. Back in the day, and this is me not that long ago, well, maybe in the 90s. We're recording on tape, literal magnetic tape, and we are literally cutting with a razor blade and taping with the sticky kind of tape, that one piece of tape that we have cut, removed a spot, and need to put back together. That's where I came from. And you can imagine somebody, 25 years older than me, where she was when she started podcasting. So she's got all these stories. And one of my favorites is it took her several hours to edit early episodes. I thought it was 8 hours. She told me, no. That was the second one. The first one was 16 hours. So she doubled her time. The second one, 8 hours. Then she got it to 4, got it down to 2. Maybe, let's say it's an hour or 2. That's not unreasonable for somebody who's doing, 30 minutes, maybe an hour of tape, depending on how tight your edit is. She learned how to do it. She got her time down. And I love that. I think it's important to you as a host that you edit your own material. But with Zita, I asked her, I said, look, Zita, you didn't grow up around this stuff. You're older, more established. You've got the money. You could hire this out. And she told me this. She said, I don't want anything standing in the way of me getting my message to people. I respect that. This is something else that Gen Xers or somebody older than Gen Xers can relate to. We had magazines. For me, being in the music industry, Rolling Stone, Spin, but it could be any magazine. To get featured in that magazine, we've got to work with a writer. There's an editor. There's limited space. There are only so many pages that they print. So it was a big deal to be able to get your story out to people. And even then, pretty limited. Let's say it was 1 million people. Well, we can throw something online right now, and that goes to millions of people overnight. Very quickly. It is not the same world that we are in. I want you to be able to get your message out to people. One of the things that keeps people from doing that is editing, but that can be hired out. The biggest hurdle that I find when it comes to getting a message out to people is the lack of ability to do a solo episode. Right now, I'm in the middle of something called the 30-Day Solo Podcast Challenge. It has just started. It is not too late for you to get involved. I'm going to work you through a process, step by step by step. The process is simple. Is it easy? No. You got to show up for 30 days. You've got to record yourself. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to learn how to edit yourself. But you're going to be like Zita. That first edit, maybe a little long, not 16 hours. These are 3 to 5 minute episodes. These are very quick episodes. But you are going to need to edit yourself if you want to get the full experience of this. And you're going to need to get behind a mic on your own without music or a co-host or a guest to use as a crutch. It is scary. And it's weird. I've talked about how I record in a 5x8 room, tricked out closet. I'm sitting here all alone right now, hoping there's going to be somebody on the other end listening to me eventually. And you are. So thanks for coming through for me. If you want to get better at solo podcasting, I'm going to walk you through the process. If you want to reach out to me, you can do that in the episode notes. You can find them at podcast.bigpodcast.com. You thought I was going to say newsletter.bigpodcast.com, didn't you? Yeah, well, that'll work too. Either one, podcast.bigpodcast.com or the classic, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 203. Reach out to me. I will send you a special link. I mean, I'm not going to say it's fairly pricey. It's very reasonable for what you get. It's working with me 30 days. I'm going to listen to all your episodes. I'm going to coach you personally. But this is extremely reasonable, about 90% off. I'm trying a new system. I want to get as many people going through it to test it as possible. So if you're interested, do reach out to me, newsletter.bigpodcast.com or that first one I mentioned, podcast.bigpodcast.com. Hey, let's talk about Big Podcast AMP for a minute. That stands for Audio Monetization Program. You've heard me talk about it before. It's a personal coaching program. It helps you do 3 things: grow your podcast audience, get people talking about your podcast, and making more money with your podcast and your podcasting skills. What I just mentioned, the 30-Day Solo Podcast Challenge, things like that are free when you get involved with Big Podcast AMP. If you're curious about really diving in with your podcast, really going big with it, putting in the work, really going big, if you want broadcast or satellite radio, we can work on that together. You can find more information at bigpodcast.com/amp, bigpodcast.com/AMP. You are not late. I mentioned earlier about way back in the day. Not that way back, but 30 years. It's hard to believe. That's when I started my business. Well, 29 years. 1995, I started a business. I was still in college. It would eventually become musicmarketing.com. The first book that I published, 1999. And the first podcast that I published, 2005. I'd done radio before that, by the way. 2005 was the first podcast only because that's basically when podcasting was invented. But it's been around for a while. I remember probably about 93 or 94. You've heard of Adam Curry, known as the father of podcasting. Adam was a VJ on MTV, and he had a website called mtv.com. He bought the domain name. Back then, 3-letter domain names, something like MTV, that was available. They weren't interested until they were. Then he changed it to metaverse.com. But he had music on there that you could stream. Go to a website. You would have to have a computer that was fast enough to do that. And it was very, very low quality. Very low quality. So even with what I had access to, which is nowhere near what I've got at my house now, got a gigabyte down, Google Fiber, I was somewhat able to do streaming audio. But that was on the receiving end. I didn't think about doing it. Been doing this for a while on both the production and the receiving end. And it is very easy to look at somebody like me, somebody who started early, and think it was easier back then. Or even worse, think it's too late for me to get started now. It is not too late now. Podcasting was a lot more difficult in 2005 than it is now. I talked about the speed of computers. I talked about the equipment that we had access to. I was joking around about Alibaba. Again, do not buy a mic on Alibaba. But even if you buy a real mic from an authorized dealer, equipment has come down. The equipment that I'm talking in, and this is pretty good equipment. I've got an RE20, $550 for the mic. The stand is another $100. We're still less than $1,000. I've got a Focusrite 4i4 that I think is, $300 maybe. So maybe that's $1,000. I've got a computer with Audacity. That's free, not the computer, but Audacity. Backup recorder, $300, a Zoom F3. I've got a DBX channel strip that I'm basically using for compression and also a noise gate, just a slight amount of compression. And I've got software, I've got RX. So let's add it all up. Without the computer, maybe $2,000 worth of stuff. And that's nice stuff. You could do it $50. USB mic directly into something like Audacity. Riverside's got a free option through Spotify for podcasters. Anyway, you could argue it was easier back then because there's less competition. But people would say, what's a podcast? I don't have an iPod. Or people would say, I'm not interested. Or people would say, well, I'm on dial-up. These files are too big. Or they were going to something like radio and the things that we had back then. So let's not pretend it was way easier back then. I mean, yeah, kind of, and that there was less competition, but there were also fewer people listening. I didn't have a studio in my house, by the way, until 2014. Even then, you had to have a lot more equipment than what I'm talking about now. Had a big mixing board, huge, it was 14 channels. It had something, we used to call it an effects loop when I played guitar. Basically going out of the board, going through some effects, going back in the board, then going into your computer via an analog to digital interface. Here's my point. I had to get a 14-channel board to get that. And it was a lot more expensive than it needed to be. I really only need about 2 tracks. One for me, one for a guest, one for me, one for a co-host. Maybe 3 or 4 tracks if I had a group together. You can do that digitally. I talked about Riverside.fm, multi-tracks. Was it easier then? Yes and no. In some ways, it's a lot easier now. And that's the point. The right time is now. $49 USB mic. And by the way, I've got one recommended. It is real, not a cheap Alibaba mic. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. If you're ready to get going on a solo podcast, I've already talked about that. The 30-day solo podcast challenge, it is happening right now. Also cheaper than it used to be. I'm testing a new platform. I want to get as many people going through this as possible. This is your opportunity. It's 90% off, man. It's a deal. If you want more information, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 203. The 30-day solo podcast challenge. Let's get into it. A little bit deeper on what I've been talking about. It started this week. It is not too late. What I just said. Not just for podcasting, but for the 30-day solo podcast challenge. It is not too late. If you're sick of relying on a guest or co-host to release a great episode, this is for you. I'm going to be personally taking you through a process to help you develop the skills that you need to be a solo podcaster, deliver content that people want to listen to, and also grow your audience and authority in a new way. Are you interested? I've got more information. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 203. Hit me up, man. I will get you a discounted link. We will get you in there, and we will get you working together with me and other podcasters who are going through this for the next 30 days. You're going to meet a lot of great people. You're going to learn a lot about podcasting, and you're going to learn about yourself. More information, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 203. Rapport building with Howard Stern. Let me tell you a funny Howard Stern story. Speaking of back in the day, in the 90s, 96 through 99, I was living in Columbus, Ohio. In Columbus, Ohio, I was very excited about because I'd come up from a little town in Mississippi, and before that Memphis, and before that Nashville. None of those cities had Howard Stern. So I get to Columbus. They've got Howard Stern syndicated on my FM radio. I listen to it occasionally. And I say occasionally because at the time, it was a bunch of fart jokes, and I'm no prude. No. But I was like, it's just not that funny. He was making fun of callers, and it was very low class. And I was like, no. And that was me in my 20s. I was pretty low class too, but anyway. So I would turn it over to the Christian station because they would tell similar jokes, but it was just lighthearted. It wasn't mean. They weren't making fun of people. Now, ironically, that situation is kind of flipped. You go to a Christian radio station now, not as inclusive as it was in the 90s. And you go to Howard Stern, a lot more inclusive and a much better interviewer. I think he is the top interviewer in radio right now. So let's talk about what he's doing right. Last issue, I talked about Call Her Daddy, and arguably a pretty good interviewer for her audience. Howard Stern was probably great for a 20-something male back in the day, just not me. But the overall audience, yeah, people loved him. That's why he's the number one radio host ever when it comes to syndication. Not the highest paid. That was Rush Limbaugh. Also a great host. But Howard Stern, when it comes to syndication and ratings, nobody did that better. But his audience grew. They changed. Just like Call Her Daddy's audience has grown and changed. So let's talk about this. As I mentioned, the last issue of Big Podcast Insider, I talked about Call Her Daddy because Call Her Daddy was one of the podcasts that Kamala Harris went on. And Trump is doing this too. I get a lot of emails anytime I mention something like this. Why are you so liberal? Why are you just talking about Kamala? No. I'm talking about the election now. And I'm doing a both sides thing here. Trump's got a different audience. He's going to the people he wants to reach. Kamala, she wants to reach younger women that probably aren't very politically active or maybe are so young that they've never voted in a presidential election before. That's why she's doing this. And I talked about that. Podcasting is an important part of this election and getting this information out. Kamala did something similar with Howard Stern. I've got it linked. I want you to watch the first 5 minutes. It is a masterclass on how to quickly build rapport with guests and establish the foundation for an interview, showing how he brought in his authority. This is the vice president of the United States. Could be intimidating to people. He sets the stage. He lets you know this is the kind of interview that it's going to be. He's in charge. He's going to take good care of you. We use this word guest. We're taking care of our guests. He gets her comfortable, and they go at it. Again, it is a masterclass of building rapport with a guest. You've probably seen the Howard Stern TV show. A lot of his stuff is still on video. And this is on video, where Baba Booey, Gary, the producer, will bring in guests. It's live radio. You got to get them settled, get headphones on them, get a mic in front of them, start talking instantly. They need to be warmed up. And he does that on the fly. Of course, he's doing it beforehand. They sometimes show a little bit of that on the Howard Stern TV show. They also show what happens afterwards. I want you to consider this for your podcast. I talk a lot about pre-interviews. I talk about making your guests comfortable. I talk about quickly building rapport. I talk about follow-up. This video, the first 5 minutes, that's all you got to watch. A masterclass of how to set the space, how to get your guests comfortable, establish your authority right then, right there. You're in charge of this interview. This is your show, and getting right into it. You want the video? You want more thoughts? Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 203. Pod Indy. It's INDY. Stands for Indianapolis. And it is November 9th. It is an independent podcasting event. It is for you if you want to use your podcast to grow your business or authority. You want to learn how to leverage AI to magnify and multiply what you do. You want to meet and network with like-minded people. Does that sound familiar? You might think I'm affiliated with it. I am not. I know the guy who is affiliated with it, Brad Miller. He's a sharp guy out of Indianapolis, maybe obviously. Some people you know will be there. Dave Jackson from School of Podcasting will be there. I love local and regional events. I think they're the best way to meet people that you can keep in touch with throughout the year. National events, yeah, that's nice. But how often are you going to see those people? The next year? You meet somebody at a local event, you're local, they're local. Get together the next weekend. Do a show, trade some guests, borrow mics, whatever. It is a great way to meet local people. It's called Pod Indy. It is November 9th. I've got it linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. The world is a quiet place. I'm going to finish this sentence. The world is a quiet place until you hit record. Last week I did a session for radio. It was a remote guest. And the guest had a dog in the background. The dog barked once. She immediately apologized. I said, don't worry about it. I told my engineer, who was also on the line, Stephanie, I said, Stephanie, leave that in. We're going to bring this dog into the discussion. And I made just a quick remark about how, like so many people these days, we're working from home. She's doing this interview from home. I'm in my tricked out 5x8 closet. And the dog's working from home too, living his best life, wants to chime in on our radio show. It didn't take away from what we were recording. If anything, it made the guest more human. And at the end, I roll the credits. This episode produced by super producer Gary Crane, engineered by Stephanie McFadden, hosted by me, David Hooper. My guest today was blankety blank with a live studio audience of Bingo the dog. Something like that. Just a joke. And that made me more human. Speaking of rapport and likability, it helped me with her. One of the worst things you can do when you've got a remote interview or any interview is have some kind of disconnect between you and the guest. This is why I've got a producer. If there's something tough that needs to be said, let the producer be the bad guy. I want to be the friend. No, man, of course you could bring cocaine and booze into the studio. Yeah, man. Mi casa, su casa. Just kidding. We don't allow that. We've had people try. The way I get out of that is I said, we've had people show up and be under the influence of something, and it never ends up well. They say something they later regret. So we would recommend not doing that. We can do this later if you need to. And then we maybe do it later or maybe not do it later, depending on who it is. You don't want somebody on your show. I mean, arguably it could get you good radio if somebody gets in there and says something crazy, but it could also be completely off the wall. It's also, I would argue, an ethical thing. It's like taking advantage of somebody with Alzheimer's or somebody who's drunk. I've got a friend of mine. He was a boxer. He's got some brain damage, memory type stuff. I would love to do an interview with him to talk about his career, talk about what that was like, but he's just not able to. So unfortunately, it's one of the ones we had to let go. It's lost forever, at least coming from him, at least ethically. And that's my ethics. Your ethics might be different. And this is the joke. You can see this at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. In general, what I advise people to do is to work with what you've got unless it distracts from what you want. Somebody who's drunk, maybe entertaining, but is it going to be a good episode? Somebody's got a dog in the background. You can work with that up to a certain point. If the dog is going completely crazy, maybe not. A leaf blower. Maybe not the best time to record. Again, I think you can make something work, but you've got to be able to match the mood. I've talked about the death dedication from Casey Kasem on here. You heard that? You can listen to that at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 203. I've got some classified ads for you, things that will help you to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, build a bigger podcast. NoteJoy makes podcast production with guests, co-hosts, and producers easy. We've been talking about remote production. I love NoteJoy for the planning, for the episode notes, for the research on your guest. Whether you're collaborating in real time or across time zones, NoteJoy makes you feel like you're in the same room. If you want to check it out, I've got a link for you to try it for free. You can find it at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. AudioPen, the easiest way to convert messy thoughts into clear text, including podcast outlines. You hit record on your phone and start rambling. I love AudioPen. I've used it for a couple of years. A lot of AI tools now. And this one is great because there's a web version and there's also a mobile app. So you're driving, think, hey, that would make a great episode. But you're driving. You can't stop and write anything down. Hit the AudioPen app. Start talking. I want to talk about this and this and this and then this and then this. Cut it off. When you get back to your desktop, you've got a podcast outline waiting for you. You're never going to lose an idea when you've got AudioPen. I've got a link for you to try it for free. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Hey, thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast, the 30-day solo podcast challenge. I've got it going on right now. There will never, ever, ever be a time when you can work with me like this for as little money as the 30-day solo podcast challenge. 90% off right now. I'm testing a new system. I want to put as many people through this system as possible. If you're interested, go to bigpodcast.com. Send out a smoke signal, send out a homing pigeon. Whatever you do, let me know. I will get you a discount link. We'll save you 90%. You will work with me and others for the next 30 days. A lot of people involved in this. You're going to love this. I talked about these local events and how great it is to meet people. You can do it online too. You can do it with the 30-day solo podcast challenge. Do reach out to me via bigpodcast.com. Thank you so much for listening. You can subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode at bigpodcast.com/subscribe. One button is all it takes. One for Android, one for iPhone, and one for an RSS feed. Pick the one you want. I'm not going to judge you. I just want you to get every single episode of this. Get it for free. Listen to it. Use it to grow your podcast. Get a bigger audience. Spread your message. Make more money. It's all here every week, sometimes more than once a week, on every episode of Build a Big Podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. I'll see you on the next episode.